that's where all the car dealership mystery happens, is, and where they play their games is usually in the money factor. My first car kind of turned into a bit of a nightmare because I had bought my first car and it was a 2007 BMW, and about 2.5 years into ownership, the value had tanked and it needed about $3,500 in repairs, which is about half the value of the car at that point. So I immediately said to myself, I don't really want to deal with this anymore. I just want to be able to take my car to a dealership and get it fixed always and never have to pay $1 for anything. So the first lease deal I did was on a 2014 3 Series, and I got hosed on that for sure. I definitely did not get the best deal possible because I didn't know what I was doing at the time. It certainly wasn't bad by any standards, but it definitely wasn't the best. And from there on out, I had said, all right, I really like leasing because I like the idea that nothing with this car is my problem, but I wanted to make sure that I was never paying a single penny more than I had to for a leased car. And so I would say about 3 months later, I had realized that 328 really wasn't what I was looking for. It wasn't really an enthusiast car. It was just a loaner car spec, really. Nothing special about it. And so I started researching and learning and searching for my next car, which was going to be a 4 Series, an M Sport 4 Series. If you're looking for the cheapest way to drive around in a nice new car, something cool that you might actually like, and the maintenance is somebody else's problem, leasing does make a lot of sense, especially if you can hit the perfect storm of circumstances. The first would be to look for a car that's aged on the dealer lot, something that they want to move. Typically, anything more than 60 to 90 days is something that a dealer is going to want to get rid of. If you can compound that with it being a demo or a former loaner car, that also usually can take a heavier discount. And if you get really lucky, find something with damage reported on the Carfax, just because everybody knows you can get more money off if there's damage reported. And in many cases, it really doesn't matter on a lease because it's not your problem. You're giving it back at the end, and it doesn't hurt you in any way financially to have that car. You also want to look out for models that have high residual values, meaning what they're going to be worth at the end of the lease. You want to also look for low money factors, which is your interest rate on the loan. And in some cases, you can even find cars, typically electric cars, with the government kicking in some money on your lease payment. So I had found, luckily not too far from me because I live in a very saturated market, which helps. This definitely isn't as easy to do in other markets, but in Long Island we have, I want to say, 8 or 9 BMW dealerships within a 30 to 40 mile radius of each other. So the competition's pretty fierce, and I wound up finding a car that was fairly close to me, and it was a demo. It had about 3,000 miles on it. I work up this email, and I've been using this email for years, and basically it sort of sets out my intention. I give the stock number, and I go on the website, and I grab usually 2 of the manager's emails, and I CC them on the same email, and I just state my intention, which is, if we can do the following deal, I'd like to come take the car this weekend. And I believe that that's an important thing to do if you're going to try lease hacking, is to actually be serious about taking that specific car, because what you're doing when you send a lease hack email is you're sort of just making a proposal to a manager where there's no work involved. If you did your work right and you know the numbers, there's no negotiation. It's just a simple business decision for them. Do I want to move this unit or do I not? So I would definitely say be serious if you're going to try this. Don't just go sending 15 emails to a bunch of dealerships hoping that one of them might come back, because you'll probably find that multiple dealerships come back with the offer that you were hoping for. So the way you calculate a lease payment and figure out whether or not you're getting a good deal, you're going to first want to start with figuring out what the MSRP is of the car, which is simple because that should be on the window sticker. And then you want to find out what invoice is for that car. And invoice is the price that the dealer pays for the car. And in general, if you're hacking a lease, you want to get a pre-incentive discount, meaning a discount before any manufacturer, cash, regional credits, lease incentives. You want to negotiate the discount before incentives, and you want to try to get invoice or better as a discount. Because remember, we're usually going after aged inventory, something maybe less desirable, something so highly optioned that nobody wants it because it seems like it would be too expensive. So you start off with your MSRP, figure out the discount you want pre-incentive, then you'll put in your tax incentives, and the difficult part in calculating a lease is the money factor and the residual. That's where all the car dealership mystery happens, and where they play their games is usually in the money factor. And the money factor is basically your interest rate on the loan. Some brands have very reasonable interest rates, close to 0%. Some brands like Porsche are charging almost 7% interest on a loan. And then you have brands like BMW that are in the middle, somewhere around 3%. So the best way to know what your base money factor is and what your residual is to utilize the internet. Unsurprisingly, the Edmunds forums are pretty much the only place and the best place you're ever going to find this information. You'll typically Google something like BMW 4 Series lease deals Edmunds, and you'll get a whole thread where you can simply just request the money factor and the residual for the deal that you're looking for, and somebody will get back to you, and they'll tell you the base money factor and the base residual. You'll plug all this into the calculator, and you'll get a monthly payment then with your local sales tax included. And then you'll have an idea of what that payment should look like at a base rate. So leasing does allow you a lot of movement, and you want to be sure of that before you lease a car, because some leasing companies do not allow lease transfers. Some leasing companies also make you keep a part of the equity, so to speak. There are certain brands that they'll transfer the lease to somebody else, but they'll want you to still remain liable for, say, 20% of the remaining payment should the other person default. In the case of Porsche Financial, they, up until recently, and I believe this is changing, they keep you on the lease as a guarantor even after you've transferred it. So now your car is in somebody else's possession completely, and you're still just on the banknote with them. And if they stop paying, they'll just come after you for the remaining balance without doing anything to recover the car, give the car back to you, or you're completely out of luck. So I would say make sure before you lease a car, if you have the intention of wanting to transfer out of it, which is a very common thing to do, make sure that you can freely transfer with no obligation after the fact. So at this point, I think I've successfully completed about 3, maybe 4 lease transfers, and especially with BMW, for me, that's what I have the most experience with. It's a very smooth process. You just make a phone call, they send your new buyer a credit application that they can fill out online, and if they get approved, you get emailed a set of documents, everybody signs, sends it back, and then they get their registration papers, and you get a note saying, all right, you can legally hand over the car. And in the case of BMW, I've done a lease transfer in as quick as 2 weeks if you overnight the paperwork back. So the best way to advertise a lease transfer, if you got a really good deal, you can go on the Lease Hacker forums, you could go on your relevant brand-related forums. I've always advertised on the BMW forums. Or if you really want to move something quickly, you can go on swapalease.com and you can pay their marketing fee. I think it starts at $99, goes up to almost $500, and they have different packages. But they are, without a doubt, the number one marketplace for moving a lease, because that's just a market that they've managed to capture. And usually it takes me no more than a week to find a taker or an assumee for a good lease deal. Now, if you were to go into a dealership, which I don't typically recommend, because the worst way to negotiate any car is to just walk into the dealership, I always recommend sending an email ahead of time. What you'll find is that most dealers have a money factor markup just built straight into the system. So even if it looks like they're being transparent and they're just showing you the computer and saying, take a look at these numbers, don't these look great? Well, that money factor is probably marked up without them even having to mark it up to begin with. So if you go in armed with that knowledge of what those base rates are, you have a lot of advantage over a standard buyer who isn't necessarily sure what they're looking at on that computer screen. So one thing that's really common for a dealer to do is to show you an insane discount on the price of a vehicle. And this is why I say that the monthly payment doesn't matter. You really want to watch what your discounts and your incentives are, because it's about how you get to that monthly payment that matters. So a dealer might have a car that's $40,000 and they're showing you a $10,000 discount, and that's 3 or 4% below invoice, and they're saying to you, look at this great discount I'm giving you on this car. Nobody's going to match this discount. But then the money factor is, let's say, 0.00128, which I believe is about 3.5%, and that's the base rate, but on their computer it's 0.00128, 156, and now they've made a markup on the money factor, which turns into basically pure profit for the dealership. Some brands cap the amount that a dealer can mark up the money factor. Some brands don't really care. It's just more about how the deal is structured. But if you didn't know that that was a marked up money factor, you would think, well, this is a great deal, I'm getting a huge discount, when in reality it's probably an average discount, or in many cases not really much of any discount, and they've just sort of made that money back up somewhere else in the deal. So there's this notion in the lease hacking community, if you'll let me call it that, that if you can lease a car for 1% of the MSRP per month with zero down and your taxes rolled in, so basically the only thing you pay to pick up the car is your first month payment, any DMV fees, and maybe some other small dealer fees that they use to just pad in that little extra bit of profit. But if you can get to that 1% mark with your taxes rolled in and no cap cost reduction, meaning no money you pay to lower the monthly payment, that's usually considered a good deal, because that means that you're just paying 1% of the MSRP per month to own the car, which is fairly in line with the honest depreciation of a car versus you paying for any accelerated depreciation. If you're shopping and your goal is simply to just get the best deal, and you really don't care whether or not it's a BMW X3 or an Audi Q5 or whichever mid-sized German luxury SUV it is, then you're at an advantage already, because you have a lot broader range, and you can go on those Edmunds forms and you can take a look at what the residual values are and what the lease incentives are for that month, and you can see what should lease best for that given month, and then pick a car based on that. Personally, I always look for cars that I actually want, which makes it a little bit tougher. But one of the funny things about doing this is over the years I've made really good relationships with a lot of dealerships, and I've referred a lot of business to many dealers, and I try to show some level of loyalty to the people who have helped me out. And one of the things that I like to say is the best way to get yourself a good deal on a car is to simply just be nice to these people, because they deal with nonsense all day long, and people coming in and saying, I will definitely buy this car if you can do that deal, and then they definitely don't buy that car the moment they say that they can do that deal, because in their minds they have this notion that, well, if he can do the deal, then that means that there must be more left and I have to get it from them, when in some cases they really are just giving you a good deal. So I think it's one of my unwritten rules. This is just be as nice as possible and value the dealer's time, and say simply, look, if we can make this work, great, and if not, then that's also all right, and I appreciate it. So I've been fortunate enough now to be at a point where if I wanted to order a new, BMW's always been what I'm into, so if I wanted to order a new car, I can pretty much usually just custom order about 2% below invoice. Part of my recommendations are always to start your negotiations in the last week of the month with a deal that commences at the final 2 or 3 days of the month. And if you really can wait and you're in an advantageous position and you don't need a car immediately, the end of the year is also an incredible time to buy a car. I definitely had one lease deal where the dealership did lose money on the car. This was a BMW 4 Series that I had gotten at a dealership out in Pennsylvania. And this was a unique case of, I personally really thought that the car was cool, but in that specific market, which was a more wealthy, ritzy part of Pennsylvania, a gray with a bright red interior 4 Series coupe with a manual transmission was not something that their clientele was really going to want. And to compound that further, the car was a manager demo, because we all know that they're not loaning out 6-speed cars to anybody for a loaner. Just by itself, you should be able to get a good discount because it's a demo. But in this case, it had been sitting on their lot for quite some time. And I had started the conversation on this car, and I wound up getting, I think it was about 16.8% off MSRP before incentives. And what really made this deal even crazier is that BMW had a lot of 4 Series left in dealer inventory, and there was about, I want to say, close to $8,000 in incentives on the 4 Series in that month. I believe it was $5,500 in lease cash, and another $2,500 or $3,500 in loyalty if you had owned a BMW in the previous 12 months. And when you're doing your lease payments in general, incentives, every $1,000 is $30 off the lease on a 36-month or thereabouts. So if you can imagine that, we're now artificially lowering the price of that car monthly by quite a large margin just from what BMW is kicking. And that's not even a loss to the dealership. But we know that if BMW invoices 6% and holdbacks another 5%, that's 11%. Well, this dealership was going about 16.5% off pre-incentive because I guess they just knew that this car was never going anywhere in their market, and they were probably going to have to wholesale it. That was definitely my best deal. And another thing to note that I also always say is not to put any money down on a lease, even if you can and you just want to make your lease payment lower for some reason, and you understand that there is a direct correlation to money down versus amount of money off your lease. You're not actually paying less for the car, you're just paying that amount up front. From what I understand, if you were to lease that car and then crash it a month later, you wouldn't get any of your down payment back. And you have gap insurance on a lease, they're going to cover what you have left to pay on the lease. But if you put $5,000 down, well, good for the insurance company then. They just have to pay out less, but you're not getting any of your $5,000 back if you crash that car the day after you lease it. So in general, I would say don't do a cap cost reduction on a lease because there's some risk involved in that. One thing to note when you're looking to do a lease hacking deal is not to just look at what somebody else paid for the same car 3 or 4 months ago, because a lot of people think dealers are lying when they say that that's not possible this month things are different. That's actually almost always true. Sometimes programs don't change month to month, but in many cases they do, and it's a very complex thing, and every model has different amounts of manufacturer incentives and cash on it, and the money factor can change month to month, the residual can change month to month. So don't just see a great deal online and walk into a dealer expecting that you can get that deal that month. You have to do your research, you have to know your money factor, you have to know your residual, you have to know your incentives, and you figure out what the best deal is for that month. And if the deal doesn't seem particularly great that month and you can wait, then just see what happens next month.
We'd like to thank Avalon King for their continued support of the VINwiki YouTube channel. Obviously, I've installed it onto my Porsche 993, which one of our app users is going to win once we hit 1 million subscribers. I've got it on the LP640 and it's performed flawlessly in both cases. The cars are much easier to clean, the finish looks a lot better, and I've really been impressed with it. So we're going to do some more experimentation with the ceramic coating this month, but please do check out the link in the description below, enter the code VINwiki for a discount, and thank them for supporting your favorite YouTube channel.